Establishing central control, this pawn opens diagonals for potential piece development and immediately stakes a claim in the heart of the board. Instantly mirroring white's pawn thrust establishes central symmetry and contests key squares. Challenging the center immediately, this gambit seeks to open lines and gain rapid development. Solidifying the central pawn presence, this defense opens pathways for development while cautiously inviting white's positional pressure. Developing the knight now gracefully bolsters the central pawn chain and prepares for castling, solidifying white's early advantage. Developing that knight into the center solidifies black's pawn structure and prepares for queenside expansion. Preparing the fianchetto, white aims to control the long diagonal and indirectly pressure black's central pawns. Initiating central pawn confrontation, black bravely challenges white's spatial ambitions. Opening the center here invites a dynamic, tactical skirmish, immediately testing black's pawn structure. Reclaiming central space is key. Now the pawn chain is solidified and fighting for squares begins. Instilling rock-solid diagonal influence, the bishop eyes the weakened queenside pawns and prepares for central domination. Developing the knight to its natural square enhances the pawn chain's defensive structure while contesting central control. Securing the monarch opens up lines for potential piece activity across the board. Developing the bishop to its natural square, it prepares to castle and reinforces the central pawn structure. Sacrificing a central pawn, white aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and open lines for rapid development. Reclaiming the pawn immediately reestablishes material equality and opens lines for black's active pieces, creating an engaging, balanced middle game. Developing the bishop to create pin pressure on the knight is a sound positional idea. Securing the monarch swiftly avoids potential future complications on the queen side. Developing the knight to its most active square, nc3, immediately enhances the piece coordination and prepares potential central breakthroughs. Boldly snatching central space, black seizes the initiative and challenges white's knight on c3, initiating a dynamic pawn race. Sacrificing the bishop opens lines and initiates a complex tactical sequence, aiming to disrupt black's pawn structure and attack the king. Reclaiming the pawn with the queen immediately simplifies, but opens the queen's diagonal to white's bishop. Suddenly, a knight leaps forward, threatening to disrupt black's queenside harmony and seize a crucial outpost. Repositioning the queen to d6 addresses immediate pawn threats, while subtly aiming to activate the bishop on c8 and potentially challenge white's central pawn majority later. Shifting the knight to d2 prepares a kingside pawn storm, but delays castling and central control. Reclaiming the pawn and reinforcing the central dark squares solidifies black's position. Unleashing the knight to f4 aims to exploit the exposed black king and seize control of key squares. Repositioning the bishop to b6 offers an excellent diagonal for attack and potential piece exchanges. Dominating the queen side, the queen probes for weaknesses, aiming to control the file and harass black's undeveloped pieces. Asserting the open c-file is crucial for unleashing your queen and rook's combined power against white's potentially exposed king. Asserting command over the central column, this rook bolsters the d-pawn's advance and prepares for potential exchanges. A bold knight advance, seeking active squares and challenging white's central dominance. Pivoting the knight to d3 aims to enhance kingside protection while preparing for a potential pawn push on the queen side, subtly shifting the battlefield's dynamic. Reconnecting the queen to the kingside defense tightens black's structure against the impending pressure. Bolstering the knight on d3 now, preparing to shift it towards a more active central outpost. Shielding the king from the bishop's potential diagonal thrust, this prophylactic maneuver prepares for further pawn advances while assessing the compromised king's safety. Aimed at activating the rook and preparing for potential action on the open d-file, this maneuver seeks to enhance central influence. Reclaiming the central d-file is a vital step, solidifying your position and preparing for future action. Securing the queenside pawn structure against potential knight incursions sets the stage for gradual maneuvering. Fortifying the king's shield with this pawn advance initiates a crucial defensive maneuver, preparing for potential queenside advances while solidifying kingside structure. Challenging black's control of the c-file and probing weaknesses around the monarch. A bold attempt to seize space on the kingside, though it may weaken the pawn shield around your king. A probing thrust, forcing a decision about the queen's placement and contesting the central light squares. Unleashing a desperate attempt to break white's spatial grip, this move sacrifices pawn structure for a potential counterattack. The queen repositions, preparing to harass the kingside and potentially exploit the vulnerable pawn structure. A bold attempt to disrupt white's control and create some breathing room for black's pieces. Liberating the c-file for decisive action against black's potentially exposed monarch. Recapturing the bishop reestablishes material equality, but leaves your king exposed along the open c-file. Recapturing the rook on the open file reasserts centralized pressure and aims to exploit black's slightly awkward piece placement. Centralizing the bishop on e6 bolsters the pawn chain and prepares to contest the crucial light squares. Repositioning the knight to a more aggressive square, aiming to disrupt black's queenside pawn structure. Aggressively challenging white's active bishop, this move seeks to improve black's piece coordination and create dynamic counterplay. Puncturing black's kingside pawn structure creates immediate attacking opportunities. Reclaiming a central outpost for the knight injects much-needed dynamism into black's position. Reasserting pressure on the queenside and offering a favorable exchange, this repositions white's queen to a more active square. A cunning repositioning, preparing to contest the pivotal e7 square and potentially launch a kingside attack. Challenging the blockade, this pawn advance aims to disrupt black's queenside coordination and potentially open lines. A calculated repositioning, aiming to activate the bishop and contest the central squares, potentially preparing a kingside pawn push. Shifting the queen to the queenside now aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and potentially target weak squares. Liberating the bishop from its pawn chain's constraint, aiming for active play and potential threats on the queenside. Carving out queenside space with this pawn thrust aims to dislodge black's imposing bishop. Repositioning the bishop to c7 defends the pawn on b7 and prepares to contest the c-file. Seizing the open file decisively, this exchange liberates the c-pawn and potentially pressures black's queenside. Re-establishing a pawn chain creates a solid defensive structure, though it does block the bishop's diagonal. Reinforcing the knight's central presence aims to hinder black's queenside expansion and prepare for further piece maneuvering. Reactivating the queen offers a chance to contest the central light squares and potentially disrupt white's kingside initiative. Clearing the queenside files opens up tactical skirmishes for white's king. Centralizing the king opens diagonals for counterplay and prepares for potential pawn pushes. Propelling the pawn creates a barrier, reinforcing your queenside structure while eyeing potential breakthroughs. Simplifying into an endgame, black immediately equalizes material by taking the queen, a prudent decision given the complex piece exchanges. The rook's repositioning now dominates the open file, anticipating future skirmishes. Relocating the monarch towards the center is a sound defensive strategy in this simplified position. Reactivating the knight by stepping it forward to a centralizing square offers better protection for the weak pawn structure ahead. Reactivating the bishop aims to create counterplay on the queenside, challenging white's control of that flank. Seizing the open file after the exchanges, this promotes king safety and eyes the weak pawns. Securing the bishop's escape route and reinforcing the center, this defensive maneuver prepares for potential pawn advances. Securing the king's safety is paramount as the queens depart, preparing for a more active rook. Unyielding defense begins here, rerouting the rook to fortify the queenside pawns against further encroachment. This rook lift dramatically activates the passive piece, aiming to seize the crucial central files and pressure black's weakened structure. A knight's bold venture now seeks central influence, aiming to disrupt the entrenched pawn structure and create dynamic imbalances. Unlocking the knight's potential by forcing the king's hand creates a clear advantage, opening lines for attack. Prioritizing piece activity over pawn structure now, the king ventures toward the center. Dislodging the enemy knight from its outpost allows immediate pawn advances, aiming to seize control of the central files. Reclaiming the lost outpost for the knight promises better piece activity. A bold assertion of central influence, aiming to restrict black's beleaguered knight and prepare for a pawn storm. The king bravely steps forward, seeking active participation in the endgame skirmish. Striking the knight liberates the e-pawn, opening lines for a central thrust and preparing further piece activity. This retreat concedes the d-file and opens up a potentially dangerous outpost for white's knight. A bold regrouping, forcing a choice between the knight's new outpost and black's compromised pawn structure. The black king, exposed by the rook's retreat, now ventures out, seeking safety but risking further positional concessions. Shifting the knight aims to exploit the pawn's weakness and pressure black's queenside structure. Attempting to solidify the knight's outpost, but this position now favors white's coordinated pieces. Seizing the open file now disrupts black's pawn structure and gains a crucial territorial advantage. Snatching that pawn ignores the exposed king and opens lines that will quickly spell disaster. Purging black's centralized knight seizes the initiative, paving the way for a decisive pawn push. King seeks refuge on the back rank, but the knight's repositioning on a6 presents a lingering threat. Unleashing the pawn's advance, a bold bid to disrupt black's consolidating forces.